Ever wonder why some box office bombs now command midnight screenings with costumed superfans? That's the magic of cult status, where financial failure transforms into cultural immortality. These aren't just movies, they're religious experiences with devoted disciples who can quote every line. Let's dive into 15 films that bombed financially but conquered our collective consciousness. Donnie Darko. Richard Kelly's mind-bending masterpiece made a pathetic $517,375 on initial release. A high schooler, a demonic rabbit, time travel, and the apocalypse. Critics didn't know what to do with this psychological nightmare that blended teen angst with quantum physics. Jake Gyllenhaal delivered a career-defining performance as the troubled teen haunted by visions of a monstrous rabbit named Frank. The film found its audience after 9/11 when its themes of doom and existential dread suddenly felt unnervingly relevant. College screenings turned into packed events, and suddenly everyone was debating time travel theories and scribbling cellar door in their notebooks. Even the director couldn't explain half the film's mysteries, which only fueled the obsession. The director's cut, later released to appease the rabid fan base, actually confused viewers even more. DVD sales eventually hit 10 million copies, proving financial failure means nothing when you've created a philosophical puzzle box that haunts viewers for decades. The Room. Tommy Wiseau's catastrophic vanity project cost $6 million to make and earned just $1,800 during its initial 2-week run. This cinematic disaster has since become the gold standard for so bad it's transcendent filmmaking. Wiseau wrote, directed, produced, and starred in this baffling melodrama featuring inexplicable plot threads about betrayal and rooftop suicide that appear and disappear without resolution. The dialogue sounds like it was written by an alien attempting to understand human emotion. "You're tearing me apart, Lisa," has become the battle cry for terrible cinema enthusiasts worldwide. Monthly screenings have sold out for nearly 2 decades, with fans throwing plastic spoons at the screen and reciting lines in unison like a bizarre religious ceremony. Hollywood eventually immortalized this train wreck in The Disaster Artist, earning Oscar nominations for chronicling the making of the worst movie ever made. Wiseau, once mocked mercilessly, now charges $100 for selfies at conventions, proving absolute failure can transform into absolute cult stardom. Blade Runner. Ridley Scott's dystopian noir bombed so hard in 1982 that studio executives demanded voiceovers to explain the plot to confused audiences. The film lost millions against its $28 million budget and nearly ended Harrison Ford's career momentum post-Star Wars. Critics called it confusing, boring, and visually impressive, but emotionally empty. Then something magical happened. The film refused to die. VHS rentals exploded and multiple theatrical cuts appeared, each developing its own faction of devoted fans arguing over which version was definitive. The philosophical questions about what makes someone human resonated with tech-obsessed audiences entering the computer age. Its neon-drenched, rain-soaked cityscape influenced everything from architecture to fashion to video games. Now regularly ranked among the greatest sci-fi films ever made, Blade Runner's DNA is visible in virtually every dystopian vision that followed. It took 35 years to get a sequel, but the original's influence never stopped growing, proving sometimes audiences need decades to catch up to a visionary's wavelength. Office Space. Mike Judge's workplace comedy earned just $10.8 million on release in 1999, barely covering its modest production costs. 20th Century Fox had no idea how to market this deadpan takedown of corporate America, burying it with minimal promotion. The story of Peter Gibbons, who stops caring about his soul-crushing job after a hypnotherapy session goes wrong, struck absolutely no chord with theatrical audiences. Then came DVD and cable television, where endless repeat viewings transformed it into the anthem for every cubicle dweller contemplating arson. The red swing-line stapler became so iconic the company started manufacturing them in that color to meet demand from fans. TPS reports, flare buttons, and a case of the Mondays entered workplace vocabulary permanently, Judge crafted such a precise dissection of office hell that the film now functions as a documentary for many viewers. Its influence reaches far beyond comedy. Actual workplace consultants use Office Space as a training tool for what not to do in management. Sometimes a film bombs because it hits too close to home, only to become a survival guide for its target audience later. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Terry Gilliam's adaptation of Hunter S. Thompson's drug-fueled Odyssey crashed and burned at the box office, earning just $10.6 million against its $18.5 million budget. Critics eviscerated this hallucinatory journey through 1970s Las Vegas, calling it unwatchable, incoherent, and a noble failure. Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro disappeared completely into their roles as journalist Raoul Duke and his attorney Dr. Gonzo, embarking on a surreal bender involving every substance known to mankind. The film is essentially 2 hours of bad decisions, lizard hallucinations, and increasingly unhinged behavior with no traditional plot structure whatsoever. Audiences fled theaters, yet the film found its people on home video, becoming required viewing for college freshmen alongside black light posters and lava lamps. Thompson's savage critique of the death of the American dream, filtered through Gilliam's uncompromising visual chaos, eventually earned academic analysis and museum retrospectives. Depp's performance became so iconic that young viewers who've never read Thompson think the journalist actually looked and sounded like Depp's portrayal. When your commercial flop becomes the definitive portrayal of a literary legend, you've transcended box office numbers entirely. Jennifer's Body. Karen Kusama's horror comedy was marketed as Megan Fox being hot, instead of the feminist revenge tale it actually was, earning just $31.5 million against a $16 million budget in 2009. Critics dismissed it as exploitative trash, completely missing that Diablo Cody's script was deliberately subverting the very tropes they accused it of embracing. The story of a cheerleader possessed by a demon after a botched satanic sacrifice by an indie band was simply too ahead of its time. Fast forward a decade, and the soccer Me Too movement suddenly made the film's themes of female rage, objectification, and predatory male behavior feel prophetic rather than pulpy. Tumblr and Twitter users began dissecting its clever dialogue and subtle commentary, transforming it from box office disappointment to feminist horror touchstone. Fox herself has been vindicated, with critics now praising the performance they once mocked. The famous "I'm not actually evil, I'm just practical" monologue now appears on t-shirts and coffee mugs. Sometimes a film bombs because audiences aren't ready for what it's actually saying, only to be rediscovered when society catches up to its message. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Edgar Wright's hyperkinetic comic book adaptation cost $85 million to make and earned just $47.7 million worldwide, making it one of 2010's biggest financial disappointments. Universal had no idea how to market this genre-bending tale of a slacker bassist who must defeat his new girlfriend's 7 evil exes in increasingly video game-like battles. Wright created a visual language blending 8-bit gaming, comic book aesthetics, and music video energy that simply overwhelmed mainstream audiences. The film featured a cast of unknowns who would later become superstars. Chris Evans, Brie Larson, Anna Kendrick, and Aubrey Plaza all appeared before their breakout roles. Its rapid-fire editing, fourth wall breaking, and endless pop culture references became standard a decade later but alienated viewers at the time. The film now commands sing-along screenings where fans bring replica props and cosplay as characters. Game developers have cited it as inspiration, musicians have recreated its fictional bands, and animation studios have borrowed its visual techniques. When you create something so stylistically revolutionary that the culture needs years to absorb it, box office numbers become meaningless statistics. Mulholland Drive. David Lynch's nightmarish Hollywood fable earned just $20 million worldwide despite critical acclaim, with mainstream audiences walking out of theaters utterly bewildered. Originally conceived as a TV pilot, then reconstructed into a feature film after being rejected by networks, the film follows a hopeful actress arriving in Los Angeles who becomes entangled with an amnesiac woman hiding in her apartment. That's the last coherent thing about it. The narrative deliberately fractures, identities shift, and reality warps until viewers question everything they've seen. Blue Keys, Mysterious Cowboys, and a theater called Club Silencio became puzzles for obsessive fans to decode. Film schools now teach entire courses on this single movie, with each professor offering different interpretations. Lynch refused to explain anything, making it the cinematic equivalent of a Rorschach test. Naomi Watts delivered a performance of such range that it launched her career despite the film's commercial failure. Sometimes a film bombs not because it's bad, but because it refuses to conform to how stories are supposed to work, creating a new language that only the devoted will learn to speak. The Big Lebowski. The Coen brothers followed their Oscar-winning Fargo with this shaggy dog noir comedy that earned just $17 million domestically in 1998, barely recouping its $15 million budget. Critics were confused by this tale of a bowling-obsessed slacker mistaken for a millionaire with the same name, dragged into a convoluted kidnapping plot. Jeff Bridges' portrayal of the Dude seemed too meandering and pointless for audiences seeking another tight Coen crime story. Then something extraordinary happened. Fans began hosting annual Lebowski fests, dressing as characters and drinking White Russians. An actual religion called Dudism emerged with over 450,000 ordained ministers. The film's dialogue became so quoted that lines like, "That rug really tied the room together," and "This aggression will not stand, man," entered everyday speech. The Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry, declaring a commercial flop culturally significant. When your box office failure inspires a religion with hundreds of thousands of followers, you haven't just created a cult film, you've created an actual cult. It's a Wonderful Life. Frank Capra's holiday classic performed so poorly on its 1946 release that it put his production company out of business. Yes, the film now shown on endless repeat every Christmas was initially considered too dark and depressing by audiences seeking post-war escapism. The story of George Bailey, a suicidal man shown how different his town would be if he'd never been born, was dismissed as sentimental propaganda. The film lost $525,000 against its $3.7 million budget, a catastrophic failure at the time. Then something magical happened. The copyright wasn't properly renewed, allowing television stations to broadcast it for free during the holidays. Constant airplay throughout the 1970s and 80s transformed it from forgotten failure to essential Christmas tradition. Jimmy Stewart's performance became the standard for everyman heroes, and the film's message about community over capitalism resonated more deeply as American society changed. Today, it's impossible to imagine Christmas without it, proving the ultimate case of cult status transcending commercial failure. When a financial disaster becomes so culturally embedded that families plan their holidays around viewing it, box office numbers become historical footnotes. Tron. Disney's groundbreaking 1982 sci-fi adventure cost $17 million to make, but earned just $33 million, a disappointment for the studio that expected much more from its revolutionary visual effects. The story of a programmer transported inside a computer world was technologically ahead of its time, featuring 15 minutes of completely computer-generated backgrounds that the Academy Awards refused to recognize, claiming the film cheated by using computers. Critics called it visually impressive but emotionally hollow, and audiences weren't ready for its digital landscapes. The film found its audience through early computer enthusiasts and video game arcades, where the Tron game often earned more than the movie. Its glowing aesthetic influenced everything from fashion to music to actual computer design. Silicon Valley programmers cited it as inspiration, and terms from the film entered technological vocabulary. 3 decades later, it received a $170 million sequel and Disney theme park attractions, vindicating its commercial failure. When your box office disappointment literally helps shape the digital revolution and influences how computers themselves are designed, you've transcended mere entertainment to become technological prophecy. Is Spinal Tap. Rob Reiner's mockumentary about a fictional British heavy metal band earned just $4.7 million in its 1984 release, a commercial whimper that almost ended Reiner's directing career. The film follows the decline of Spinal Tap, a once popular band now playing to empty seats and getting lost backstage at their own concerts. Its revolutionary improvised approach confused viewers who weren't sure if this was a real documentary or comedy. The film's subtle satire was so accurate that actual rock stars like Eddie Van Halen claimed it wasn't funny because it was too real. Its influence proved immeasurable. The mockumentary became a legitimate genre, with phrases like "turn it up to 11" entering everyday language. The fictional band began performing actual concerts with albums that charted on Billboard. Legal disputes over music rights meant the film disappeared from circulation for years, making VHS copies highly prized collector's items that fans would duplicate and share like contraband. The U.S. Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry, transforming a box office failure into a culturally significant landmark. When your commercial disappointment creates an entire filmmaking style and your fictional band becomes real, you've transcended mere entertainment to become cultural lexicon. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. This beloved children's classic was a significant financial disappointment in 1971, earning just $4 million against its $3 million budget. Paramount considered it such a failure they sold all rights to Warner Brothers for a flat fee. The bizarre tale of a reclusive candy maker inviting children to his factory, where they meet increasingly disturbing ends, was considered too dark and scary for its intended audience. Gene Wilder's portrayal of Wonka as slightly unhinged rather than warmly whimsical confused viewers expecting traditional family fare. Director Mel Stewart refused to make Wonka conventionally likable, instead embracing his mercurial nature. The psychedelic boat tunnel scene traumatized a generation of children, with parents complaining it gave their kids nightmares. Television airings throughout the 1980s gradually built its audience, with children drawn to its candy wonderland and adults appreciating its surprisingly dark messages about parenting and morality. The film has since spawned countless memes, musical remixes, and Halloween costumes, with Wilder's sardonic "You Get Nothing" becoming shorthand for epic failure. When your box office disappointment becomes the definitive childhood memory for multiple generations, financial metrics become irrelevant next to cultural impact. The Rocky Horror Picture Show. This musical extravaganza cost $1.4 million to make and earned just $22,000 during its initial 1975 run, with theaters dropping it after dismal attendance. Fox executives thought they had an unprecedented disaster on their hands with this tale of a vanilla couple encountering a cross-dressing alien scientist and his bizarre creation. Then something unprecedented happened at the Waverly Theatre in Greenwich Village. Audiences began returning weekly, dressing as characters, shouting responses at the screen, and throwing props. 5 decades later, it holds the record for the longest-running theatrical release in film history, still playing midnight shows where fans perform alongside the film. Tim Curry's performance as Dr. Frank N. Furter transformed him from unknown actor to cultural icon overnight. The film created an entire participatory viewing culture that no other movie has successfully replicated. Mainstream theaters initially banned it for perversion, only to later compete for hosting rights to its lucrative midnight screenings. When your box office bomb creates a theatrical experience so powerful it's still selling tickets 50 years later, you haven't just transcended financial failure. You've created a self-perpetuating cultural institution that will outlive everyone involved in making it. So, what makes a true cult classic? Is it the fervent fans, the midnight screenings, or something more intangible, that spark of weird genius that refuses to die? Drop your cult movie obsessions in the comments and tell me which box office failure changed your life. Are we witnessing any bombs right now that will be worshipped in 20 years? Remember, today's flop might be tomorrow's religion. Keep it weird, vault dwellers.